We all knew that death row was not going to be, he wasn't going to be that person on death row for 10 years.
Shots were fired from a passing white Cadillac.
He said, "You don't know what's up? Niggas need to be disappeared around here."
Yeah, he's done. He was done. He had fulfilled his obligation with death row.
Yesterday, the Reverend Jesse Jackson arrived and said a prayer at Shakur's bedside. We've been informed that doctors have told the family members that they expect the rap star to once again recover from his injuries.
The only thing that can kill me is death. It's the only thing that'll ever stop me is death. And even then, my music will live forever.
In a man's mind, whomever he would be, after dealing with someone close to him, his death, any individual, who knows why we would do anything outside of mourning. There's a period of mourning. I mourned over Pac for quite a while, all the way to the point of suicide, of mourning over Tupac for a whole year.
Tupac Shakur was more than a rap or a hip-hop musician. He was a poet, teacher, activist, movie star. Even today, countless acts in hip-hop try to imitate his style. The Guinness Book of World Records recognizes him as the best-selling hip-hop artist, with over 75 million albums sold worldwide, including over 44.5 million sales in the United States alone. Something else important concerning Tupac was the way he died. He was shot to death in Las Vegas, and to this day, there have been no charges filed in relation to his death. His death remains one of the most notorious unsolved murders of the last 20 years.
Why is it that in 2008, we can take a baseball player to Congress to solve what? Whether he used steroids or not? Who cares?
I'm coming forward with the information because someone asked me, and I was willing to tell them what I knew.
Let's solve a murder.
In 10 years, the Las Vegas police have claimed no new leads.
We've looked at it several times.
I was there in Vegas when he was shot.
We have no indication.
I was one of the first people to the hospital.
Or actually nothing that's going to lead us in a direction to arrest anyone that was involved.
But I was never interviewed by anyone, so I'm just coming forth now to set the record straight. And some of the things that happened to Tupac, we need to check within death row before we start pointing the fingers at other people.
No question, sign with death row.
It's the summer of 1996. All Eyes on Me has reached quintuple platinum status. Tupac gets to see his first #1 single. His next album, to be released in November of '96, is called Machiavelli, or The 7-Day Theory. It's recorded in a record 7 days. Tupac was considered by industry leaders to be at the top of his recording game, and with over 120 unreleased master tapes, who could argue?
He worked so much in those last 9 months that he separated from a lot of people. And I think that you change labels and you're suddenly in a new environment. Anybody, it affects anybody.
I just signed a death row record. I got Fatal and Felony. I got Dramacidal, Thug Life is coming back. My albums, I should be doing a couple more.
And he's got the limo and he got all his buddies with him, and now we go back to my house to eat the fried chicken and the potato salad.
My name's Napoleon, former member of the Outlaws, the Tupac Outlaws. Yeah, I met Pac through Gaddafi, who was a half-brother of Pac. And me and Gaddafi, we was childhood friends. His mother and one of my cousins and aunts, they knew each other, so we used to hang around each other when the birthdays and things like that come around. Back in the day when I used to celebrate birthdays, we used to be together and celebrate it with each other.
I was just riding this wave. If you think of like Hawaii 5-0 and the people on the surfboards, and they're just riding the wave and it's so cool. I was like riding this wave with this person, and I feel like I did a huge wipeout, and the breath of my life got knocked out of me. My energy to do things kind of just went.
James, what's up, man?
I feel you, homie. Hey, I hope you Chinese if you got some Chinese tattoos on you. You Chinese? You don't know what the fuck is wrong with you, huh? That shit can say 2 egg rolls on you right now. That shit, you got, hey, get that. Ask somebody Chinese if you watching this tape, don't just say 2 egg rolls to go. With hot sauce. Is that what this say? Niggas ain't Chinese, get Chinese letters like they been somewhere and shit. You ain't never left the block.
Occam, a 14th century teacher of logic, said, "All things being equal, the simplest solution tends to be the best one."
Based on my professional experience and from what I know that took place in these events, I believe it was a planned killing. This type of planned killing has happened all over the world.
The murderer moves in, and here is the shame of all America as Jack Rubenstein takes the law unto himself.
All right, this officer's gonna stay here with you. I'll be back in just a minute.
Lieutenant Jeff Braley's experience comes with the military and federal law enforcement.
It's happened for so many years we can't count them.
About to see the most amazing pictures ever made. The assassination of King Alexander of Yugoslavia. It's a gala day in Marseille. Vive Alexander! Vive le roi! Oh, they've been shot.
Random opportunity. They happened to be there, and that's how it worked out.
Random shooting. Random shooting when you've got just driving down the street and just coincidentally some gunman sticks his arm out of a white Cadillac and shoots the biggest rapper in America, and that's a coincidence.
You have all the elements in place that show that there was a plan there in place to eliminate this particular person.
They're pretty good dudes if they picked that spot to do it with that kind of traffic. I don't know how you could be that specific, but like I said, you can't rule out anything.
When you have a planned crime, you know, this is not just some random act. When you have a planned crime, you simply go as far back as you have to. You know, when did that plan start? What led us to this point? You know, if we have a homicide and we know that it was something that was planned, we're going to start interviewing people, you know, whether it's weeks, months, or years prior, basically whatever it takes to find the inception of that plan. Whose idea was it to kill this person? Why did they want them dead? And when did they start talking about it?
That's just plain out period. Don't come to jail. I'm telling you straight up, this ain't the spot. It's dirty, it's filthy, it's like you an animal. And it's just not the spot. No man don't want to be here. No man or woman wants to be here.
Pac is now in Dannemora. Everybody is visiting him back and forth.
Before the Rikers, after the Rikers, Dannemora, after Dannemora, I mean, I visited him. I took a trip. One day I was like, I gotta go to New York and see Pac.
I got a phone call that Death Row had went to visit Tupac and that I think he's signing with Suge.
I worked with him prior to him, you know, going to Death Row Records, which I can never understand.
Pac worked 24/7.
Because I knew he was gonna end it. This was just a means. He had to get out of jail, and he wanted his mom to have a house. And he would do those 3 albums. And after those 3 albums were done, the house is paid for. What is he gonna do? Because he had other ambitions.
In those months, in those last 9 months of his life, he had the kind of desperation that I talked about earlier. The only thing that mattered was to make a difference.
Thug life is like the 12th grade. Some people graduate from high school and don't seek to do anything else.
His lifestyle on video and on tape and even on song looked like a party. It wasn't a party, it wasn't a gangster party, it wasn't a party at all.
I had no idea he was bigger than life. I mean, it's not just people have built him up that way. I mean, he was already speaking at colleges and whatnot.
By the time the 1996 Interscope agreement was made, Tupac had recorded approximately 152 unreleased songs that were not included in the 3 albums that were the subject of the 1995 Dannemora agreement.
He had lots that he wanted to do. He definitely was not about being, he had his time with Death Row.
Nothing in the 1995 Dannemora agreement gave either Death Row or Interscope the right to exploit the unreleased songs.
It just was gonna be ugly, and because we had already heard on the phone, driving around in LA, a call, Tupac is at Death Row, pissed off. He wants his shit.
I got a call from Al Gittins. I was at home, I lived in Orange County. And Al Gittins says to me, hey, you need to get to the studio because Pac is trying to, take masters out of the studio. And Suge has told us that no one is to take masters from the studio anymore. So apparently there had been a problem, and this was, again, the first time I heard about no one can take masters or anything that they've recorded out of the studio. And the reason why I wouldn't have heard that is because I didn't work in the studio anymore, because I was Pac's now bodyguard.
Tupac Shakur wanted his master tapes. If he had obtained them, it may have been trouble for Death Row Records. Recent court documents from artists who have sued Death Row in the last few years speak of a trend of Death Row holding on to master tapes. The problem for Death Row may have been that these tapes were mortgaged. We know that Death Row had money loaned to them from Interscope. If those tapes, whose value is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, were removed from Death Row, it may have led to a break in the relationship between Death Row and Interscope. There was nothing in the contract between Death Row and Tupac which gave Death Row ownership of the tracks, either the compositions or the sound recordings, even though the physical master tapes were in the possession of Death Row.
He called me specifically knowing that I was Pac's bodyguard, saying, hey, you need to get down here, you need to talk to him, you need to calm him down, he's cussing, he's going off, he's going crazy, and this and that. And I said, look here, man, what do you want me to do?
If he was asking for his masters or asking for the paper that he signed, because he did those 3 albums, it didn't take him long.
Even if I would have tried, I wouldn't have made it in time, and I wouldn't have been able to stop him, and I probably wouldn't have stopped him. It's his stuff. What am I gonna do?
Ain't you gonna get that?
Yeah. Yeah, baby. I'll be there in 1 minute.
Who was that, Piggy?
Oh, that was just Faye. She always checking up on me.
He's a lying piece of shit, man.
Pac, please don't kill him.
Tupac's closest bodyguard was former bodybuilder and U.S. Marine Frank Alexander. Next to him, Kenny Archer, Leslie Galden, Michael Moore, and Kevin Hackey comprised the staff of key personnel assigned the task of protecting Tupac.
Late 94, early 95, I work in the studio as well.
My name is Michael Moore, and I am a station captain in the fire department. I started working for Death Row back in 1994, and I was responsible for all the medical.
96 is when I came on, I believe. It was either late 95, November, December, or early 96.
Pac was good to all of us. I believe he was all of our friends. And, we all have our memories of him. We all have had something that we would like to say. And this is, Leslie's and Kenny's first time, actually getting on tape, being able to give their experience and their views and the things that they shared with Pac as well. Pac came to Club 662. He says to me, "Yo, Big Frank, did you get the news? You get the news?" I was like, "Yeah, man, I heard." I go, "What's up?" He goes, "You're gonna be my main security. You're gonna be my main bodyguard, man. It's gonna be me and you, Frank."
I started on Pac as a substitute, filling in for Frank, filling in for Leslie. Whoever was on him, I was more of a fill-in for that.
Working with all of the other bodyguards was pretty cool. It was pretty good. We were a pretty tight team. We could have been a really good team when you look at how 2 police officers as partners are going to work together. There was a group of us, let's call it 6 of us, that rotated on Tupac, okay? And we all communicated very well. We all did what we had to do to protect him, and there was never any problems.
Chaos. A lot of chaos there, a lot of confusion. There were good days at Death Row, and there were bad days at Death Row.
A CEO of a company or the wife of somebody being murdered is one kind of investigation, but now you're talking about something where there was all kinds of alleged baggage involved as far as Tupac wanting to leave Death Row Records.
Michael Moore was my replacement for Pac that weekend at the MTV Awards in New York.
I was in a limo, and the radio came on with Snoop Dogg saying that he had no beef with New York, which sent Pac into a rage. We immediately spun the limo around, and we went back to the hotel to confront Snoop. We couldn't find him, but we found Mr. Knight.
I don't care if nobody never support me no more. I'm doing this for self, you know what I mean?
I was there when an argument took place between Tupac and Mr. Knight in the hotel room about what had happened. That was the first time I heard Machiavelli, and Pac's words were, I'm gonna cut out Machiavelli, and when I cut out Machiavelli, I'm the hell up out of here. You got your money, I don't want nothing else to do with Death Row, I'm out. Mr. Knight was very upset. They got to yelling at each other back and forth. They confronted each other basically to a face-to-face. I did slide in between them. I'm usually asked to step outside the room. But on this occasion, I think Mr. Knight had me stay for the safety of Tupac, because I think Mr. Knight, with me not being there, he would have put his hands on him. He was that upset. Tupac said, hey, fuck it, I'm out of here.
I was told by another one of our security guards that was a bodyguard that he had escorted Pac to the airplane as they were leaving New York. And Tupac told him, specifically told him, that he was a dead man walking.
What did you tell me he told you?
I know you
and I had a conversation.
Yeah.
You told me that Pac felt like
I
he
think,
was
you
a
know,
dead man walking.
right. What it was is that I think at the time, after we did the
MTV Awards.
I think after we did the MTV Awards, you know, I don't know what went down, but he wasn't too happy about it, and he didn't care about going anywhere. He didn't feel like he didn't want to go to Vegas. I don't even think he wanted to do the video.
The last thing he said to me prior to leaving was, he's not going to be in Vegas. I don't have to worry about him showing up, and don't worry about it because he won't be there. I think Tupac wanted to leave, and I don't think Death Row wanted him to go.
Everybody that was involved knows what happened. Watch people, because you can fake for a long time, but one day you're going to show yourself to be a phony.
Tupac was to attend the Mike Tyson-Bruce Seldon fight.
I arrived at Las Vegas the day before Pac did on a Friday.
He did not want to go to Vegas. Matter of fact, he fought off going to Vegas all the way to the last second. And when I got there, I was surprised to see him there. We met at an attorney.
George Kalisis.
George Kalisis was the attorney for Club 662. Kalisis was a prominent attorney in Las Vegas, known for Clark County judges who owed him money. In fact, several cases that were represented by Kalisis's firm were awarded favorable decisions, and at no time did the judges make it known that they were in literal debt to Kalisis. And on the subject of not knowing, it was a common conception that Knight owned Club 662 when he did not. Like many of the death row legends, this is also a lie.
Okay, so the thing that was of interest to me was the Club 662. Suge Knight had an interest in that.
Reggie asked me to ride with him to the meeting. I was actually going to ride with Michael Moore. He began to tell me about how he was upset at Kevin Hackey, and that Kevin Hackey had my Nextel two-way cell phone radio that should have been given to me when I arrived in Vegas.
It's huge. You know, one of the things you'll see throughout history, and even in a military assassination, is let's take out communications. The same is true in an assassination. Let's make sure that they can't call for help. Let's make sure that they can't communicate with each other. If they're in trouble, why would we want them to be able to tell anyone?
Don Erath, retired LAPD investigator, agreed to address the elements of police work in general. Erath was first in the LAPD to be awarded the Los Angeles Police Department's Distinguished Service Award Medal, the highest award given by the LAPD not involving loss of life in the line of duty.
One cannot ignore the ability to communicate. We're in an instant communication era. For a detective to ignore this in an investigation is ridiculous.
George Kalisis called the meeting at the behest of Reggie Wright Jr. All of the bodyguards were there.
We've never had a meeting per se in Las Vegas at an attorney's office. That meeting, there was probably 15, 20 of us, and it was out of the unordinary. All right. In California, we would have a meeting either at Can-Am Studios. We would have debriefings and things like that just to let us know, hey, this is what things are going to be like, you know, ABC, XYZ, right? Those are the only times we had meetings that would be meaningful about something relating to the artist or whatever it would be. Inside of this attorney's office on September 7th, it was kind of strange.
Reggie Wright told us not to carry any weapons. Never have they told me to leave my weapons, either in my room or my car.
He was no one that none of us had ever seen before. This happened on September 7th of 1996, first time out of character.
For an attorney to do that, I don't know why.
We had a meeting at Club 662, a security meeting, because for security we had on any given weekend that we were going to be in Las Vegas, nothing like on September 7th around noon or so when we had this particular meeting the day that Tupac was shot.
Since I wasn't there to know what was said, I don't know what the reason was for it.
If you cannot defend yourself, you're going to be an easier target for me. If you're my intended victim and you carry a gun, I have to plan completely differently than if you did not. So if I can get you to be unaware of the danger, if I can get you not to carry the gun or have any personnel with you that are armed, you're that much of an easier victim and an easier hit, because as the hitter, as the shooter, as the planner, you're protecting yourself.
It was a special meeting. He was called in to be at his office on a Saturday to meet with all of us.
Why would I leave my weapons in a vehicle or in the hotel room, and I'm personally guarding Pac in one of the most hottest places to be? And what that's going to make it is a bodyguarding incident where you would be, only thing you would have on you is your person.
And Michael Moore made the biggest hoorah about the weapons.
I informed Reggie that I wasn't taking my weapon off for no one. My gun did not belong to Right Way.
Metropolitan Police in Las Vegas were on Suge Knight's payroll that night, moonlighting. And I would think that those guys who were hired by Suge and were with him that night would have been interviewed by the police. But I mean, maybe they know something. Everywhere you went, there was like this tightness that nobody wanted to. It was almost like people were afraid to talk about the case. I mean, there was a weird sort of ring around the investigation that was tough to penetrate.
I don't own, and none of the other bodyguards own, the security company. So when you're given a directive to do something, you have to follow it. And if you don't, possibly you could have, cost you your job. It was just out of character. It was out of place. So it was out of place. I don't want to say what I was going to say. It was out of place.
I think maybe Pac became a little bit bigger on security once he fell in love with Frank Alexander.
Frankie, is that what you just said? Yeah. Frankie? Yeah, tell Frankie to call me. Frankie, you call me when she tells you to call me Frankie.
Why?
Frankie goes to Hollywood. Hey, yo, Frankie. Frankie. Yo, Frankie.
How do you record this fool?
Why? Y'all call him Frankie?
Nah, we gonna call him Frankie.
Only our family call me
Elamika. Forever now.
What y'all call him?
Frankie. Now we call him Frankie. Yo, Frankie, we got him, y'all. Frankie Knuckles. Frankie Knuckles up in this motherfucker. Frankie Knuckles.
No, what y'all call him? For real, straight up. For real.
Frank. But now the E sound real, actually, because Frank a little extra sexy and too sexy for some sleeves. It's certain situations where there is no way out.
Earlier that evening, after the meeting at the attorney's office, Reggie said, hey, Pac is back at the Lexor. I'm going to go drop you off, go meet up with him. So he dropped me off. I saw Pac and all of the outlaws. I went over, hugged him, greeted him and everything. And, Pac said, hey, Big Frank, how was your vacation, man? I was like, it's cool, man, So he had been gambling. He was actually shooting craps at the Lexor.
We had a dinner meeting, make that a lunch meeting. And thank God it's Fridays, I believe. In Las Vegas, prior to the fight starting. And I was told that I'd be taken off Tupac Shakur. And Tupac did not have a clue that's what we were doing. I was a little upset that I was taken off of him, and I got into a little argument with Reggie Wright at lunch over it. He said, Mike, I'm putting Frank back on him, and I'm taking you back off. And I said, Reggie, that part doesn't make sense. Why not leave me and Frank on 2pac? And he said, Michael Moore, do what you're told. I'm gonna put you at Club 662, and you're gonna handle the security along with Al Giddens at the club.
And, you know, Pac is Pac. He said, hey, let's go. And we go, where are we going? He goes, we're gonna go over to the MGM. And I'm like, well, are we gonna get a cab or how are we gonna get over there? He goes, no, we're gonna walk over there.
It's plenty of times he was alone without a bodyguard. We walked in the malls without bodyguards. Pac was that type of guy, you know? He wasn't always relying on a bodyguard. He wasn't like that.
I think the reason they removed me from 2pac is because I was one of the few people that wouldn't buy into not carrying your weapon. And during no part of that day did I take my weapon off. And Mr. Wright knew that. So they removed me off 2pac so there wouldn't be a weapon there.
I don't know of any clubs, when we're talking about a private club like this, where people are walking around armed in it. Keep in mind now, hotel casinos have got armed security guards, and a lot of those have even gone away from it.
So Michael Moore, myself, and all of the outlaws with 2pac walked from the Lexor to the MGM.
During our conversation on the way back from the MGM Grand, I explained to 2pac that Mr. Wright was taking me off of him earlier that day. He was a little upset. He made a couple phone calls.
We get to the MGM, again, he goes to a crap table, and the MGM was a little bit, more crowded that evening while he was gambling. He was gambling, he was, winning, he was doing good, and Pac said to me, go over, call Reggie, and find out what time Suge wants to meet to go into the fight. 2pac asked me to go make the call. I didn't have a radio, I couldn't contact Reggie, so I had to go to a landline phone. So I go to call. As I went to call on a landline phone, I came back to the table, and they were all gone.
I think Frank had no idea that I received them 4 phone calls prior to 2pac getting killed.
While we were at the MGM out in the arena right there waiting to go in, I had the regular security escort us behind the line.
3 of the phone calls came from Mr. Wright, and 1 phone call came from Al Giddens, who was also head of 662 security. And I asked him, I go, Al, why are you calling my room at 10 after 8 if I'm not supposed to be there till 10? And his answer was, Reggie just called me and told me to call you. I said, well, don't call me no more. And then after that, all my phone calls came directly from Mr. Wright.
People saw Pac, they were, 2pac, that's 2pac, and we're waiting for Michael Moore to show up. At that point in time, I had lost all communication with Michael Moore. I didn't know whether he was coming, what was going on, or anything.
I think there was a reason for that. And I think the reason was making sure that no one carried a weapon.
Pac was real antsy. He was like, where's Suge at? Where's Suge? How come Suge ain't here? He's looking at the time and stuff, and it's getting closer for the fight to start at this point. People are going in.
We got down to the MGM, right in the front of it, right where the fight was at, and I was getting ready to get out of the car. I rode with Tim Williams over there. He goes, Mike, what are you doing? I said, Tim, I should just get out. Because if Reggie yells at me and I'm covering 2pac, how bad can that be? Well, at the last second, I decided to just stay in the car. I went to Club 662.
2pac and Alexander are alone in a crowd with no radio or weapon.
To me, that's the beginning of our downfall.
Suge got there with a couple of people that was with him, whoever it was that had the tickets, and we went in to the fight right as the national anthem was playing.
And Selden is down on his stomach.
Steve, there are 2 unalterable truths in boxing. If you have a great you don't
The
have
Tyson fight ended in 109 seconds. Tyson won by a knockout.
And that's it.
It's over in the first round.
Once again, when we talk about the shooters and everything else, you're going to talk about the defense of the shooter to escape after the hit. Now, that defense of that shooter doesn't take place just when the hit occurs. It takes place afterwards too. And if I can shift blame to someone else, put someone else in a place where they look like they had motive and they had opportunity to make this hit, and it takes the blame off of me, that adds to my defense.
So this is what we're gonna do. I want us to come in, when you turn that corner, after the car get out, one soldier get out. Before you get out the van, you pop the nigga at the gate on the roof. We walk in, bust everybody in, we clear out the money, and yo, we out of there. Nobody fuck up, change clothes. And I see y'all at the spot. Everybody know what they gotta do? Just try and rehearse this week. Let's put it on. Let's get dressed, man. Get y'all gear. Everybody get their shit. Every day uniform.
The Lakewood Mall, Orlando Anderson. In April of 1996, I got a phone call from Reggie one day, and he was telling me that Trayvon, one of the homeboys that hung around the studio, was one of Suge's guys, is what I call him, got into an altercation in the Lakewood Mall in California. And it was at a Foot Locker store. And he went into this Foot Locker, Orlando Anderson was in there, and Death Row, people from Death Row, the artists and all of the homeboy securities, whatever you want to call them, they wore this Death Row emblem of the guy in the electric chair. Everybody knows the emblem. Orlando Anderson went up to Trayvon and snatched off his emblem, his chain, and they got into this fight into the Lakewood Mall. They tore up this Foot Locker, where the store that they were in. One thing led to another. Ironically, in September, Orlando Anderson is the gentleman that Tupac got into the altercation with at the MGM.
Orlando Anderson is leaning up at a wall watching people come out of the fight. And this is near the food court. And the bank of elevators is where this happened. And then you walk to the lobby, through the casino a bit and then to the lobby. And he did not have a ticket to the fight. He did tell people at one point and told the police that he had a ticket, but he didn't have a ticket. He did not attend the fight. He's from Compton, he had no reason to be in Las Vegas.
Trayvon whispered into Tupac's ear right after we walked out of the Mike Tyson fight. And Pac took off running. I took off running behind him. The rest of the entourage ran behind us.
Maybe that was a setup. I mean, he was standing there waiting and waiting for somebody. And then Tupac shows up and they start exchanging words with his entourage and everybody else. And they start stomping and yelling and doing their silly things. But it was odd that, I keep saying odd, but the whole thing is odd. And
that's where the altercation, the fight broke out between Tupac and Orlando Anderson.
I think Orlando Anderson's, the beating doesn't make sense. I mean, he was kicked and stomped a little bit, and police didn't do anything. They didn't even take him downstairs. The police didn't take, or security, take Orlando downstairs, you know, at the MGM to talk to him about that beating. He just said no, he didn't want to press charges, and they sent him on his merry way.
Now, I never knew who Orlando Anderson was. It's just kind of, you know, funny, ironic, whatever you want to call it, that from April to September, why would Reggie have told me about Trayvon getting into this fight at the Foot Locker in Lakewood Mall with Orlando Anderson? And here we are, you know, a few months later, Pac gets into the same fight with Orlando Anderson at the MGM.
If Tim Brennan of the Compton Police Department was the first to bring Orlando Anderson's name to the front of the assassination. This affidavit, in support of a search warrant, specifies that Anderson was the likely shooter of Shakur. The shooting was in retaliation for the beating of Anderson at the MGM earlier that evening. Anderson's beating was, in turn, alleged payback for the Lakewood Mall fight that Reggie Wright told Alexander about some time earlier.
And then everything just went from there.
Planned out. I'm sure there were variations, but yeah, Orlando Anderson looks a little staged. It looks a little planned out. It all looks as if they were trying to find a killer they could point out afterward.
Brennan testifies Trayvon is the person making the clearest and first claim that Anderson was the shooter. Trayvon is said to be telling people within hours of the shooting that Orlando Anderson is the one who shot Tupac. This is the same Trayvon who had the fight with Anderson in Lakewood, and the same one who instigated the fight at the MGM. If Trayvon's statement was to be believed by Brennan's affidavit, enough to justify the documentation of it, did Trayvon actually see Anderson in the car? The only way for Trayvon to have known that fact would have been to see the face of the shooter. So why wasn't he identified to police as an eyewitness? Whatever the case, in the face of the mounting physical evidence collected by Compton police, Anderson is not charged. Was Orlando Anderson a patsy? He can't tell us. He was killed 2 years later, claiming his innocence to the death. Later, it's learned that Trayvon was in the car that pinned 2Pac's car from the left side on the street, blocking any escape when the shooting occurred.
They're setting someone else to take up the blame for their action. That's also a very ingenious part of the plan to be able to do that, is the fact that now not only can I take out my intended victim, but I can make it look like somebody else had the same motive and opportunity to do the same act.
And why go to all that trouble to stage this kind of event? Certainly Anderson could have been dealt with more discreetly. Knight went to prison over a beating, a parole violation. But in the poker game of crime, 9 years beats life. It also plays towards setting up the final alibi and cover story.
I really did believe no black person would ever shoot me.
Once again, we're going back to an element of the planning. Where are they going to be? Where are you going to plan your hit? I mean, you're going to look for the perfect place, and you're going to make sure that that victim travels across that place. You're not going to want it to be where there's just throngs of public or cars, or where you can't get close or things such that. You're going to want it maybe to be a little bit more isolated, or you're going to want it to not be an exact place to give you maximum exposure for a shot, and you're going to have that shot availability to you.
Keep in mind, where the actual shooting happened isn't as full of pedestrian traffic as it would be out on the strip. The shooting happened off the strip. A lot of people think it was right on the main drag, and it wasn't. And you don't have the foot traffic where this happened that you do where people cruise.
But the strip is going to be crazy, but it's actually stop and go. You can't go fast on the strip on a Saturday fight night. So you're going to hit the strip from the backside, coming up near Mandela Bay from the south end and driving up that way. You hang a ride on Koval and boom, you're about out of hell and gone and off the radar. I mean, that street actually, Koval Lane, is dark at night.
Experience is knowledge gained, and if a person has experience in this, they're going to know how to get rid of the communication where they can't talk to each other. They're going to know the shooter to select. They're going to know the optimum target area to get that person to travel to get that hit. An innocent individual that comes in to protect someone, and he's totally set up.
We went to Suge Knight's home first. Suge changed clothes. After that, we're driving back from where he lived at in Green Valley in Las Vegas. We're going down Las Vegas Boulevard.
Another crucial part of your planning is going to be whether or not your victim is aware that he's in danger. If your victim is aware that he's in danger, he's going to make sure that his defense perimeter is there, that his defense is in place. If he's not aware that he's in danger, his guard's going to be let down a little bit.
Just before we got to Tropicana, a couple of bicycle cops stopped Suge. He opened up his trunk, and there was nothing in there. It was a brand new car. He got back in the car. We proceeded to go down to Flamingo. We turned right on Flamingo. As we turned right and we're sitting at the light on Flamingo of Flamingo and Koval, the white Cadillac then pulled up and the arm came out and fired the rounds from the back of the BMW into the side of the BMW, hitting 2Pac.
Well, first of all, looking at the diagram, we have a stoplight and we have an entourage, which is not good for security. I would say that if this car were not in the lead car, that would still give the middle car an avenue of escape. Then you have the car with the person in it, and then you have their backup. What also I see is this car in the left-hand turn lane, or to the left of the entourage. This appears to be blocking the middle car from pulling over in case of emergency or case of accident. But I'll tell you what, this happens all the time in the Middle East, and this is typical of your assassinations in Colombia, your assassinations in some other countries, to where the car targeted is blocked in from going left because the other car that pulls up to the right completes the quadrant completes the silhouette of blocking the middle car in. There's no place for the middle car to go. The middle car is blocked in by the lead car, is blocked in by the car to the left, and is finally blocked in by the right car, which appears to be the shooter in this incident.
When I saw the white Cadillac pulling up to Tupac and Suge, you know, I mean, it was no different than any other car that was going to come up to a red light and, stop. Only thing different about the Cadillac pulling up is that I noticed that it was getting a little bit closer to the car. No alarm, because there was, other cars pulling up to him and, Tupac,
It's obvious that its intent is to block the middle car from going forward, this car left, and then finally the shooter to the right. It was sitting duck.
The arm came out, fired into the BMW, and myself and the three outlaws that was in the car with me, we are just in awe. And it looked as if everything was in slow motion. I mean, as clear as me sitting here right now talking about it, my memory will always remember. And the way I visioned it was in slow motion, even still now.
While I was working at 662, I heard something over the Nextels that we all carried for security. And what I heard was, got him.
No, that's news to me. The only phones I know of, I think, are all through AT&T.
These radios that we keep talking about, the Nextel telephones, two-way radios, they had pretty much just come into play, because originally all we had were the regular radios, just the radio itself. And probably closer to around the time of us coming out to Las Vegas, around the time frame of Pac being killed, I would say that those Nextel phone radios had just come into play for right-way security. There was only, it's a guess, there was probably only 4 or 5 of them. Okay, but it was enough to go around to the people that mattered that should have had them.
The Nextel information is news.
The voice was definitely one of our, not paid security, but one of security that works with directly for Mr. Knight, came over the radio. Now, I couldn't pinpoint exactly whose voice it was, but it was some voice that I had heard before. So I knew it was one of our, not one of our direct security that was hired with us, but one of the, what would we call them? What would we call them? One of the homeboy securities. You said, got him, right before me and Mr. Wright got in the vehicle to go get to the hospital.
Michael Moore, the night that Tupac was shot, after being taken off of Tupac with me, went back over to Club 662.
Then someone else came on the radio and said, hey, don't say nothing over the radio.
So Michael was with Reggie, and they went to the hospital together. And Michael talks about hearing something over the radio. Well, he would have heard it over Reggie's radio, because he wouldn't have had a radio that night.
Nextel sold a push-to-talk feature, which was essentially a walkie-talkie over a cell phone line. With it, conversations could be transmitted via speakerphone. This was how Moore heard the conversation on Wright's cell phone. But was this a random broadcast meant for a wider audience, with Moore and Wright only passive listeners? That's possible now. But what about in 1996? We asked the Sprint Nextel Corporation to comment on the ability to communicate with a group on the push-to-talk feature.
My name is Jack Flans. I'm a communications manager for Sprint Nextel. Group talk for the push-to-talk product was not available in 1996 as it is now.
So if a Nextel radio broadcast had to be a point-to-point conversation, and Moore hears the message over Wright's Nextel, then only one conclusion remains. Someone with immediate knowledge of the kill called right directly.
Right after the car sped off, I jumped out of the car and I ran up to the back of the BMW. As I was approaching the BMW, as I got about to the trunk, the car did a U-turn. There's absolutely no way I thought that that car was moving, because with all of the rounds that went through that car, they were dead. There's absolutely no way in the world that car should have moved.
Can we make this look like an accident, or can we make this look like a random act? Because the best thing an assassin can do is to make it look like it was a random act of violence, that it was not an assassination at all. And in their ability to do that, they once again have secured a better defense for themselves.
Random shooting, random shooting when you've got just driving down the street and just coincidentally some gunman sticks his arm out of a white Cadillac and shoots the biggest rapper in America, and that's a coincidence.
When the car did a U-turn, the other cars that was with us in the entourage, the car that was in front of Suge and the car that was next to Suge, all did a U-turn.
2 bike cops who were in the parking garage right above, on the second floor of the parking garage above the shooting, hear bang, bang, bang. They jump on their bikes, take their bikes downstairs, and boom, they're on the scene immediately. So quickly that they're able to follow and then hit their little shoulder radios that, there's been a shooting at Koval and Flamingo.
Got back over to the Las Vegas Boulevard, turned left on Las Vegas Boulevard as he's jumping mediums, he's blowing his tires, messed up his rims and all of that, as pictures show. With this crime scene tape being put around this car, and it happened so fast, like I can't even believe how fast it was. This tape was up as myself and the Outlaws and the other 2 guys, which was, with Suge, tried to go into the tape, the crime scene tape. We were told not to, and they, at that point in time, put us down on the curb, put us down in a prone position, and I said to the one cop that I was the bodyguard, and he allowed me to come in. When I got up under the tape, and Suge was laying on the ground in a prone position, and I told the cop, I said, he's the CEO of the record label, and that's 2Pac in the car. That's when Suge, they let him up off the ground, and Suge and I ran around to the passenger side of the car with the cop, and we were all trying to open the door. And the cop, Suge said, it's my car, I know how to open the door, whatever. So he opened the door, and that's when, pulled Pac out of the car and laid him on the ground.
There are no witnesses at the first crime scene. But what is of evidential value are any casings from ammunition that may have been.
The real mistake, the first mistake, was those 2 bike cops who were in the parking garage right above, on the second floor of the parking garage above the shooting, hear bang, bang, bang. They jump on their bikes, take their bikes downstairs, and boom, they're on the scene immediately. So quickly that they're able to follow and then hit their little shoulder radios that, there's been a shooting at Koval and Flamingo, and yet both cops, 2 bicycle cops, not one of them stays at the scene. Both of them leave the scene.
The victim's vehicle was 2 to 3 vehicles back from the intersection. The Cadillac pulled up immediately beside them, stopped, and opened fire.
Where the car broke down, there was, all of the cops were right there, and there was a lieutenant, and he walked over to me, and we were talking, and I said, that's not the car. It was a white car over there already. It was like a Nissan or something like that, and he was saying that was the car, and I said, that's not the car. I said, that's not the car. It was a white Cadillac, and he was telling me, you don't know what you're talking about. Shut up.
And we are looking for a suspect vehicle, which was described as a white or off-white Cadillac, newer model Cadillac.
And then another cop walked over to him and said something to him, and he just turned and walked away from me.
It amazes me that when we have professional bodyguards as part of this entourage, that they can't even give us an accurate description of the vehicle.
Kevin Manning from Las Vegas PD, he said that no bodyguard could accurately give a description of the white Cadillac. Well, I am the one that said that there was a white Cadillac.
So right now it appears that the gunshots were fired from the suspect vehicle only, again, which is described as a white or light colored newer Cadillac.
When an officer gets a description of vehicle in charge, he immediately radios in and they put out an all points bulletin for a suspect vehicle. A white Cadillac traveling in a certain direction from the crime scene. Yeah, that's mandatory.
There are helicopters available, and police headquarters is downtown, which isn't very far. It's just a couple of miles away from where the shooting took place. They could have dispatched almost immediately. I'm sure some were on call almost immediately. If not, news cameras, news crews could have been in the air.
As soon as somebody gives him a description, it goes out.
Our standards operating procedure, or a procedure that we follow, is basically that. If we have a witness came forward and say, I saw this, it was this type of vehicle, the first thing we're going to do is get on the radio and start having every agency in the area look for that vehicle. Put out the word, this is what we're looking for, this is a vehicle of interest that could be considered armed and dangerous. Let's find this vehicle, because that is a huge, huge piece of the puzzle that we need to put in place.
It just didn't feel like a typical murder investigation. I mean, my God, the biggest man in rap, was killed, and yet they were acting, I hate to use this word, but it felt lackadaisical.
This is the vehicle we want. This was the last direction of travel that that is known to us.
You could have closed I-15. They could have, they'll close it for an accident. Not even leave a small accident, not even leave a lane open for motorists. So it's not like they're worried about the motorist. They could have closed I-15, they could have closed the strip, they could have walled the place off. You had Nevada Highway Patrolmen on extra duty. You had Metro Police on overtime working. It's a Tyson fight.
Sitting on the side of the road, waiting for that vehicle to drive past them. You give the description, the direction of travel that you know of, you're going to have many agencies start to look for that particular vehicle to cover those roadways.
At state line, the Nevada Highway Patrol has an office. It just seemed that nobody did anything to try to find the Cadillac, the white Cadillac, where the shooter supposedly was in.
Now, them looking for the Cadillac and doing the things that they should have done to find that Cadillac, obviously they weren't fast enough and didn't get, to finding it, because it was never found.
Compton police claim to have identified this Cadillac as the shooter's vehicle. It was a rental car, the only white Cadillac rented in Los Angeles that weekend. Las Vegas police claimed they never received that information.
Because obviously, you got to understand, I came into this cold. In fact, I was woke up to go do the investigation.
In the event of uncooperative witnesses, depending on their value in the investigation, they could be held as material witnesses or interfering with the investigation of a felony crime, and they can be held against their will and taken into the police station until they're either willing or they obtain an attorney.
Those guys are sitting right next to each other and they're talking to each other. And you never have witnesses to a crime sit there and sit with each other. You isolate them, you take them to a holding cell, put them in different cells. They've got room especially for that.
But you don't know if you have primary witnesses if you don't start talking to secondary witnesses and also third level witnesses that heard a gunshot but didn't see anything, but they could pin down the time, the location. So every witness at every level is really potentially important.
Detective Becker at the time was the homicide detective on the case. He took us individually, one at a time, into his car and started talking to us. As he was trying to talk to us and to get answers, I'm not speaking for everyone, but I'm going to speak for myself, that I was in a clear state of mind to answer him, period, because all of this stuff is running through my head.
Frank Alexander, who was Tupac's bodyguard, who was driving the car behind him, was someone we interviewed. And again, that first night, I don't think he was totally forthcoming on everything he knew.
I just saw my friend get shot, and not only him being my friend, I'm the bodyguard, I'm supposed to be protecting him, and I couldn't do anything. No one would have been able to do anything, but the fact is, myself nor anyone else were in a frame of mind to answer any kind of questions at that particular point in time.
I can tell you that night, people were evasive, extremely evasive. In fact, they out and out lied about events that occurred preceding the shooting.
Basically, the police talking as if they were at the mercy of the people who were witnesses to the case.
You garner more information about people who you might want to interview as far as information to motive or suspects. And then you keep going backwards as far as you need to until you have all the information and it's been cross-referenced between witnesses and it's been verified and confirmed.
Said, oh well, they won't talk to us, so, and Suge Knight won't talk to us, we haven't talked to him yet.
I was never interviewed by any of the police agencies, the FBI, nor Las Vegas PD, and I found that to be a little strange because for the last week, I was with 2pac, and I didn't get a single question from anyone about what I thought, what my theory was on what happened, nor about the Nextel phones where I had heard the conversation that said, got him.
And that's where you want your primary witnesses. You want them isolated and taken to the police station so that there can be a calming period and a time for them to gather their thoughts before they're interviewed by the detectives.
He's going to have to make some very difficult choices. One of those difficult choices, does he want to put his freedom on the line not to cooperate? In other words, are we going to have to take him into custody for obstructing an investigation? We're going to need to take him back and do what we need to do to interview him.
Bodyguards, because of their association and close association to whom they're guarding, they're privy to things being said, things being seen that they may normally keep to themselves, but in this situation could actually lead to an identification of a suspect or suspects. So bodyguards are a prime source of information.
So I don't know how you can say, how the police can say that that's not cooperation when they weren't even approached. They're just sitting in the waiting room.
And if they're willing to give information, then a detective who neglects going for that information is losing a lot of valuable leads in this type of investigation.
I was there in Vegas when he was shot.
It doesn't matter whether you're bodyguards or you're a housemaid or you're a butler, you're privy to information, which is crucial, and you may keep it to yourself, but at a certain juncture, these things become paramount, these things become crucial. The conversations that are overheard, the conversations that are had, need to come forward.
Frank was re-interviewed, and Frank was very much more forthcoming. In fact, he gave a lot of information that really helped as far as what we were looking at. It was quite obvious that information pissed off some people, and people just kind of shut down as far as answering our questions related to that.
I was interviewed by LAPD. I was interviewed obviously with Las Vegas PD, and then also the FBI, yes. And I, couldn't have told them any more than what I knew, and from what I had seen or from what I had heard, and that would have been it.
And Frank, why are you doing this interview now?
Because I've done a whole lot of interviews, and basically it's to get the truth out there.
Yafufula was a name that a lot of people have thrown back in our faces that we were derelict in doing things. Yafufula was interviewed the night of the shooting. Yafufula gave a statement. People say we never interviewed him. He was interviewed. And the big thing is everybody says that he said he could identify the shooter. No, he did not. He never said that to us. He said he might be able to identify the driver. That is what he said. We tried to re-interview him. The problem was, this is a big country. People go wherever, we don't have tracking devices on them. So we have to depend on people that we know we can get in touch with to try and reach out to them. Malcolm Greenidge said he could identify the shooter. We finally tracked him down to set up a re-interview, and he says, I'm not going to look at any photos because I can't identify him. Yeah, we got beat up in the LA Times over that. And I'm thinking, okay, put up or shut up, Ace. And, well, but again, Reggie Wright Jr. is the one that brought him to that interview.
You know very little about Marion Suge Knight's partner in business. There are no pictures of this man circulating on the internet. He's a man in the shadows. That man's name is Reginald Wright Jr. Reggie Wright Jr. was a former Compton police officer. His record as a police officer was short and unremarkable.
Reggie Wright used to work for Compton PD, yes. I know he had some type of medical retirement running Right Way Security. He was not working for Compton PD.
I have no relationship with Reggie Wright at this time, nor do I plan to. Reggie is not honest, and I want to leave it at that.
One of Reggie's problems was that Reggie didn't have the executive protection background that we all had. But the difference between, I would say, the team and myself and Frank is Frank and I would speak up about it. You know, we would say, hey, Reggie, you know, you should do it this way and this is why. Or you should do it this way and this is why. And I think he was so busy being the boss that his employees couldn't tell him how or what to do, when all we were trying to do was educate him a little bit in how you do this or how you do that regarding executive protection matters. And it was kind of sad to us because, like Frank said, we had such a tight team that Mr. Wright and us could have gone places. We could have did a lot of things. We could have made a lot of money together, but he was too busy not wanting to be educated per se on particular issues that we were well experienced in that he was not. But if it seemed as if myself or Frank were trying to tell him, you know, what he could or couldn't do, then he wasn't hearing it, and that was the end of that.
Reggie Wright Jr. had one asset that made a relationship with him even more attractive: his father. Reggie Wright Sr. was on the Compton Police Department's gang detail and is still employed by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. His father's status as a conduit to the gang population may have given Reggie Jr. a unique first-hand relationship with the same gang leaders that knew his father.
If that's not a conflict of interest, I've never heard one.
I was told that normally 2pac wore body armor in public. He wasn't doing that, and the way it was put to me is that I guess he was told not to wear it. I don't know why.
Could Reggie Wright make that sort of call and use death row resources for that effort? Apparently so. In these court documents, we learn that Wright was not only the acting general manager for death row, but was also agent of record for death row records. These lawsuit transcripts also show that Wright had the authority of managing witnesses and financial arrangements on Knight's behalf. We also know that Wright had the off-duty police departments of Los Angeles, Compton, and Las Vegas at his disposal. Shakur was killed while Wright was in charge, and he was given a promotion when most security agents would not have a job.
I was fired. They fired me, and I collected unemployment. No, I'm kidding.
You did?
Yeah, I did. They fired me.
Yes, I did answer that question. I was
fired?
Yeah, I guess. You know, the way it went down was interesting, but
it was fired.
But yeah, I guess you could say that. I was fired or let go, or however you want to put it, by Reggie after refusal of doing certain work with him after Pac's death. So that I probably was unemployed by Right Way within a month.
I'm going to add something to that. We were also instructed to lie by Reggie Wright to Suge. And the reason we were instructed to lie was because Reggie Wright told us not to carry any weapons. Suge called a meeting. All the artists were instructed to come to this meeting, and certain security was invited. Prior to going into the meeting with Suge and all the artists from Death Row, Reggie met with us out front in his own meeting and instructed us to say certain things. And when I got into the meeting, it was a meeting the meeting was basically about what happened. And the artists were drilling security about what methods we had used and what were some of our tactics.
Suge wasn't even aware that I was still doing security. Reggie had taken me to another job that he was doing at a church, securing a church up in Inglewood from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.
I looked around and no one said it. No one was speaking up for security. So I seen it was more, and I've been in these type of meetings before, even at the fire station. It's almost like similar to a political type meeting of far the higher, of what was going on. So I was one of the few people that spoke up and said, wait a minute, we were instructed not to carry weapons. And none of the artists knew that. They didn't know we were instructed not to carry weapons that day. And it looked like Reggie wasn't gonna say that information to them. So I spoke up and said, no, we were instructed not to carry weapons that day. And that's why no one in security, with probably at the exception of me, had a weapon.
I remember Michael asking me, or telling me that Reggie had told Suge that I was no longer working with Right Way Security. And I would have wondered what he would have done or how he would have felt to have known that I was still working for Right Way all the way up until the end of November.
The fact that Reggie Wright Sr. is a police lieutenant who apparently was involved in this case is the father of Reggie Wright Jr., who, as I understand it, was the head of security for Death Row Records, creates a huge conflict of interest. And the fact that the elder, Mr. Wright, is referred to in the affidavit for the search warrant, I think in some ways would taint that search warrant. At a minimum, it should have been brought out in the body of that affidavit for the search warrant, the relationship between the parties. It would have been helpful for the judge reviewing that application or affidavit for a search warrant to know that.
The greatest lie the devil ever told was he doesn't exist.
Now Compton got involved because they brought detectives there and handed a Crips member to them who they thought had information, and Las Vegas police didn't interview him. They talked to him casually, hi, how you doing, that sort of thing, but they didn't formally interview him and did not name him a suspect and let him go into the night.
A man once said that people will believe a big lie sooner than a little one. And if you repeat the lie frequently enough, people will sooner or later believe it. That man was Adolf Hitler. This is an affidavit, a sworn statement written as a matter of record. It contains facts and sworn testimony. This affidavit was used to secure a search warrant in which 22 arrests were made.
As far as the affidavit and the officer's style of preparing it, some of them are narrative and some of them are a little bit more factually based with bullet points. It's pretty much up to the police officer as to how he or she wants to style the affidavit for the search warrant. But the bottom line is they have to swear that those facts are true. And judges, when they're signing search warrants, the search warrants that I signed when I was a judge, more often than not, it'd be at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning. And you read it carefully, and you question those officers. But at the end of the day, the judge signing that search warrant, yeah, he's got to trust the officer. He's got to trust that what's contained in the affidavit is correct, and what's contained in the affidavit is truthful. And if at some point down the road it's found to be not truthful or not correct, the fruits of that search that was born from the affidavit and the search warrant can be suppressed.
Well, if all your facts are based upon the opinion or assumptions of other individuals and you have no confirmation of that by other witnesses, then you're going to go back and you're going to put your affidavit together and you say, I am swearing to these truths that were given to me. And these truths may not be truth. They're only opinions and assumption. So the detective that is getting the information must be able to confirm or to have other evidentiary value to verify them as truth.
It began before dawn. The crime sweep involved 300 officers, 10 agencies, including the FBI, at more than 37 locations in the Compton, Linwood, and Long Beach areas. Compton police say the arrests were for local crimes in connection with 12 shootings that occurred in the city of Compton that resulted in 3 deaths. But officers did reveal there could be a link to the murder of rapper 2pac Shakur.
Our investigation revealed that some of the motivation for the shootings that occurred in Compton may be in retaliation for the events that transpired in Las Vegas.
In this affidavit, 2 important myths are spawned: the Orlando Anderson shooter myth and the East Coast-West Coast myth. This affidavit relies heavily on the statements of confidential informants who can neither be named nor verified as to their existence. Police often use informants to help investigations move, but informant information can be considered unreliable.
Many times in search warrants, police officers are relying on confidential and what they refer to as reliable informants. In the body of the affidavit for the search warrant, it has to be spelled out why they believe these people that they believe as confidential informants, why that they've used them in the past and that they've been reliable in the past. So search warrants have to be supported by affidavits sworn to by the police officers.
On September 8, 1996, Suge Knight does not go to his home to rest. Instead, he does a strange thing. He leaves town. Suge Knight and Trayvon go back to LA. Their goal, start a cover story and a gang war.
If you lay it out and you look methodically at the case, from beginning to end, the whole thing looks planned out. I'm sure there were variations, but yeah, Orlando Anderson looks a little staged. It looks a little planned out.
It wasn't only the Compton police that were interested in the identity of Anderson. Somehow, Anderson was pegged by someone to not only be the shooter, but a shooter with rival gang affiliations, different from that of Shakur and Death Row. This caused a gang conflict to flare right after the shooting. 5 people died, and 11 others were wounded in shootings, all started by a rumor. On September 11, 1996, Knight returns to Las Vegas, but not without Compton police, recovering a mysterious duffel bag with Southwest Airlines tags on it, some guns, and a box of .40 caliber shells. The bag did not belong to Orlando Anderson, and it takes a bit of logic jumping to make any connection to Anderson at all, save the unknown and unverifiable confidential informants.
Prosecuting cases where confidential informants are involved is always a difficult process because courts will bend over backwards, judges will bend over backwards to protect the identity of those informants. In some cases, on a specified showing, the identity of the informant can be revealed, but informants, whether you agree with the concept of using them or not, are, in this day and age, a very big part of the system, and judges will bend over backwards to protect their identity so police officers can use them in the future. But from a prosecutor's point of view, it can be problematic.
Brennan goes on to mention that on September 16, 1996, there was a meeting between Compton police and Las Vegas detectives. Eager to share what they have found and their likely suspect, they learn that a .40 caliber shell was found at the shooting scene. They also learn that the weapon was thought to be a Glock. Within 3 days, Compton PD wins the informant lottery, finding an informant who just so happens to know that Orlando Anderson had a Glock 40. Now remember, there was no mention of a Glock in the cache of weapons recovered from that mysterious duffel bag.
When I was a judge, if I would have found out that police officers misrepresented or lied in a search warrant, I would have taken immediate action. I think the first thing I would have done would be to talk to the prosecuting attorney about a prosecution against those officers for perjury or some related offense.
Now, there were so many holes in this story. I always say the truth makes sense. Other things don't make sense, and you can find holes, and that thing was just rife with holes.
If you take Trayvon's credibility away as an eyewitness, what is there? Enough inflammatory statements to incite a gang war.
In order to get a grand jury indictment in any jurisdiction in this country, state, federal, whatever, what you need is probable cause. You do not have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the standard for trial. In order to get an indictment, there has to be probable cause that an offense has been committed and the person charged with that offense has committed it. Not that high of a standard. It's certainly not proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
No, I never spoke with K-Dub or Trevon after the night that we were all within inside the taped off secured police area. That was the last time I had ever spoke to them, which would have been September 7th.
I think people are buttoned up because they're scared to death they'll get killed. But, you know, people weren't talking to the police, but they weren't talking to anybody else either. Yeah, they've been paid to be quiet.
History has proven to us time and time again is they assassinate the assassin. The actual shooter, the actual one that have knowledge of their involvement in a plan are often eliminated themselves. And sometimes that's the final steps in covering their tracks from a different crime, even though sometimes that can become a larger crime in itself.
Other witnesses, though, who have since ended up deceased, you know, that we attempted to talk to that night, refused to talk to us. McDonald didn't have anything he wanted to say to us. Now he's dead. People that we talked to during an investigation in California, they're dead. I mean, yeah, a lot of people have died that were directly or indirectly linked to this investigation. So we would try to get in touch with people, and you'd have to go through death row records or whomever.
They're going to have financial resources and going to have, I don't know if I would say trust, but the secrecy involved with other people. Secrecy can be obtained many ways, through promises or through threats.
The last time I spoke to Suge was the day that Pac died, September 13th. And Reggie called me, and I was already driving back to California at this point in time. And he says, hey, Suge want to talk to you. So he put Suge on the phone, and Suge said to me, you know, it's not your fault. You know, you did what you had to do, Frank. You know, nobody, you know, holds you at blame. He goes, why don't you just, you know, come over to the house tomorrow. We're going to go out to Lake Mead on a boat and, you know, some jet skis and just go out there and have some fun.
Well, Lake Mead is very, very deep. I don't want to say how deep because I could be wrong, but it is a deep, deep lake.
And I told Suge that I was already, you know, halfway back to California.
Tony Spilatro and his guys, Meyer Lansky and those guys, they would all go out and boat periodically, get away from the strip and the casinos and go out boating. And sometimes not everybody came back.
Since I've watched The Sopranos,
it's a lot of people disappeared after boating trips.
I wasn't going out on no boat to have fun with no one.
And I hope they look out for the next projects, the community projects, the albums, the movies.
When I first heard about it, I thought that he was going to recover. But when I seen him, to be honest, he looked like he was in a bad state.
Sergeant Manning told me that, yes, young black men get killed. I believe that's a direct quote from my book, The Killing of Tupac Shakur.
I don't know where Pac would be at right now, and only God knows. But being that if you look at him, his music that he did now, that's still selling now, that he did 10 years ago, it let you know he probably still would have been ahead of most of these cats. And God knows best, because the music that he putting out now, he been recorded it, and it's still selling platinum.
We went in to visit him, and he was just laying there and just helpless. And kissed him on his forehead, and it was cold. And after then, by the time we got on the road to come to LA, he was already dead. I mean, I just messed my whole day up. And the people that I was with too, we felt very sad because we thought that for some reason he was going to make it, but he didn't.
There's a verse in the Quran where God said, if you take one soul, O son of Adam, if you take one soul unjustly, it's as if you killed the whole humanity.
I never did get over it. I think the only person I talked to about it was Frank. And to this day, I believe that gotcha was inside the organization and not out.
The story of Tupac Shakur is a story that does not have a happy ending yet. It may never have one. The actions of Wright, either with or without Knight's knowledge, put an end to one of the most talented artists in that decade. Wright was directly in the middle of it, well beyond the act of negligence. And even when Wright and company tried to manufacture the gang rivalry and the Orlando Anderson stories, to their credit, the Las Vegas police didn't buy them. The story's much simpler than that. It's the story of a big lie. A lie to Tupac on how much money he had, a lie to the public on who killed Tupac, and a lie as to who's responsible for the death of Tupac, the man behind the curtain.
But in my death, because we all are going to die, and that's the facts of life, when I stand before God, I believe that our lives are replayed for us. And at that point in time, because Pac was a part of my life, it will be revealed to me who killed Tupac.
New witnesses and facts have been put forth. These facts were offered to media and to the Vegas Police Department. Both refused them. It's now your turn. No matter what you believed about this man, no human being deserved what happened. We hope you'll ask for those who care to get involved and help put this matter to justice. Or let this be your child.
Our lives begin to end the day that we become silent about the things that matter.
Excuse me, Your Honor. We have a young man. Let me rephrase that. We have one of the only witnesses that's not afraid to speak on this case. He knows the controversy surrounding the case, but he's totally unafraid. Totally unafraid.
Very well then. Present your evidence. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Yo, the industry like a court and I'm about to take a stand. And I gotta testify that you're really fake, man. Do you promise to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Yeah, I promise to tell the truth, cause if I don't, then who? When Pac got shot, like you don't know who it was a setup, you know it wasn't no Lando, cuz. And I can even see from Orlando blood. And I can't believe you rappers even scared to mention Suge and Jigga. You claim you got much love for Big, and you know who shot your man, and you ain't say shh, please. Man, your booty, nigga. You might as well be Beyonce and shake your booty, nigga. Breaking the silence. Man, your niggas moving your mouth, but you're really speaking silent. Breaking the silence. Calm down. Man, your rappers looking gangster, but your niggas ain't violent. Breaking the silence. silence. Be careful before you incriminate yourself. Somebody gotta say, counselor, restrain your client. And eat breaking the silence. Man, your niggas moving your mouth, but you're really speaking silent. Breaking the silence. Calm down.